My first historical horses video, I wanted to dive back in time to find out about London's horse buses, better known as omnibuses. These horse-drawn buses entered the streets in the very late Georgian period, 1829, and were a regular part of London's busy daily life till the last one in 1911. These horse-drawn buses consisted of a driver who drove the horses and a conductor who made sure everyone who boarded purchased a ticket. Omnibuses weren't a cheap way to travel. The cost of looking after the horses meant that ticket prices were expensive. These horse-drawn buses were painted in different colours to signify which company they belonged to. They would also often have the route painted alongside so passengers would know which one to get. Advertising was also a common feature, as in this picture above, bringing the company in a few extra coppers here and there. On average, the omnibus would carry 22 passengers and would be drawn by 2 to 3 horses. Rooftop seating, or better known as knife board, buses began running from 1875, which meant companies could take more passengers and earn more money. Taking a ride on the omnibus wasn't much fun. Passengers were often crammed in like sardines. It was a bumpy and uncomfortable ride with the busy roads of London. Horses would often have to suddenly stop last minute when people dived out in front of them or carriages in front suddenly stopped. The conditions inside were pretty gross, with straw on the floor to try and keep things clean. But with everyone so crammed, this was a hot spot for not only horrible viruses, but also the pickpockets. However, one plus point was that there was often complimentary newspapers and magazines for the passengers to read inside. Tough, hardy horses were needed to pull these large vehicles, and the draft horses were very sought after, very similar to my own horse here. Strong, big build so that they could pull these big vehicles that carried so many passengers at a time. Sadly, these horses didn't have an easy life, and their life expectancy was no more than about 10 years. These horses normally started their career at age 5, being brought from the sales or farms. They would start with light duties initially to learn the ropes, being paired up with an older, more experienced omnibus horse. They'd go out on the smaller wagons for a couple of hours each day until they were confident. This normally took around 8 weeks. After that, they were entered into full-time work, pulling the large omnibus vehicles. This was hard work, covering miles and miles of the London streets each day, working around 4 to 5 hours each time. In the 1890s, London had nearly 2,000 horse buses and 25,000 horses working them. 2 out of every 3 horses sadly died in service. Horse carcasses were sold to the cat meat man. As the name suggests, he sold the meat on to pet owners of the Victorian era. The horse carcasses sold for around 30 shillings a time. Each omnibus would have a team of 11 or 12 horses, swapping over every 4 to 5 hours, and there was always a spare 1 or 2 horses in case one lost a shoe, was sick, or had an injury. Lovely horses would get their 1 day off a week, which would have them stay in their stalls. Sadly, they didn't have a chance to go out to grass. There were several large stable yards dotted around London housing the omnibus horses. One of the largest was Farm Lane, Fulham, built in the 1880s by the London Road Car Company as their depot. This was a 2-storey stable yard with ramps going up to the 2nd floor. There was up to 700 horses at one time based here. The rows and rows of stalls filled this large building. Due to the many miles these horses would cover, they would often see the smithy, or farrier as we call them nowadays, on a weekly basis. It's hard to imagine just how much it would have cost for 700 horses to be fed, bedded, veterinary care, shoeing bills. It would have been a hefty sum. These courageous animals worked day in, day out, covering miles of the London streets. They were vital to the Victorians, making their life so much easier going to and from places. They really were the first conventional bus service of its time.